Buckle up for a deep dive into a scandal that's got it all. Leaked sex tapes, a high-ranking official in some seriously hot water, and more twists and turns than you can shake a stick at. And it's all happening in Equatorial Guinea.
It really is a captivating story. And it all started with Baltasar Ebang Engonga, the Director General of the National Financial Investigation Agency, or AINA for short.
Yeah, the guy tasked with cracking down on financial crimes.
Exactly. You'd think he'd be a little more careful,
Just
right?
a little.
But instead, he's found himself right at the center of a massive scandal. Hundreds of explicit videos. Hundreds, at least. Some sources are claiming there could be over 300, even as many as 400 videos featuring Engonga and a whole cast of women. And get this, some of them were reportedly filmed in his office.
Hold on, his office at the Ministry of Finance.
The very same. Talk about a workplace scandal.
It sounds like something straight out of a spy movie. How did this even come to light?
Well, it all began with a pretty standard investigation into Engonga. Embezzlement of public funds, the usual.
So authorities were already looking into his financial dealings.
They were, and it seems they stumbled upon this treasure trove of extracurricular activities during their investigation.
Oh, wow. What a plot twist.
Yes.
So the investigation started with financial wrongdoings, and then bam, they find the tapes.
You got it. And it gets even juicier. These weren't just any women. We're talking prominent figures. His brother's wife, a cousin, even the Director General of Police's wife was involved.
Wait, the Director General of Police's wife? This just keeps getting messier.
Oh, it does. And it raises so many questions, like how did these videos end up leaked? I mean, they were reportedly recorded with consent. So was this an act of revenge, carelessness, or something more sinister?
It's a giant puzzle where every piece just adds to the scandal.
Absolutely. And while the investigation into the leak continues, Equatorial Guinea is in an uproar. The videos are spreading like wildfire on social media.
I can only imagine. What's the reaction been like online?
It's a real mixed bag. Some people are understandably outraged, especially given Engonga's position and the other high-profile individuals involved.
Right, it definitely makes you question those in power.
Exactly. But then you've got others who are making light of the situation with memes and jokes, turning this political scandal into, well, dark humor.
That's the internet for you, always ready with a meme.
Yeah.
Were there any reactions that particularly stood out to you?
There was one meme that really caught my eye. It compared the president of Equatorial Guinea to that confused math lady meme with a caption something like, "The president trying to figure out why his country is trending."
Oh, I saw that one. Pretty funny.
It is, but it also highlights the potential damage this scandal could do to the country's image.
Yeah, I bet the government's not laughing.
You're right about that. In fact, Vice President Teodoro Nguema Obiangman took to social media to condemn Engonga's actions and called for a crackdown on this kind of behavior amongst civil servants.
So damage control is in full swing, trying to distance themselves from the scandal and project an image of a morally upright government.
Precisely. But they're not just relying on words. There are reports that the government has gone as far as disrupting internet traffic within the country.
Really? Could that be an attempt to stop the videos from spreading?
It's certainly a possibility. But in the digital age, controlling information is a tricky business.
Yeah, like trying to put the genie back in the bottle.
Exactly. Often these attempts just end up making the situation worse.
It seems like this whole situation is a ticking time bomb. You've got a high-ranking official caught in a web of scandal, the government desperately trying to contain the fallout, and a public reacting in a mix of shock, outrage, and amusement. It's a lot. Where do we even go from here?
That's the million-dollar question. This scandal has really shone a light on the gap between the image the government wants to project and the reality of the situation. And it's created this, well, unprecedented situation. The very institution supposed to be fighting corruption is now embroiled in a scandal of its own.
It's almost unbelievable. This deep dive has been fascinating so far.
It has, hasn't it?
We've uncovered a lot of the dramatic details of how this scandal unfolded, but it feels like we're just getting started.
You're absolutely right. We've only just scratched the surface. What does this mean for Equatorial Guinea on the world stage? Will Engonga face legal consequences? And perhaps most importantly, what are the long-term political and social ramifications of all of this? So many questions still unanswered.
So we left off with this image of the government trying to control the narrative, desperately trying to keep a lid on this whole thing, while social media is just exploding with reactions and hot takes. It feels like we're watching a house of cards starting to wobble. What are the chances this scandal actually brings the whole structure down?
Well, it's hard to say for sure right now, but this scandal could definitely have some serious political consequences down the line. You have to remember, Equatorial Guinea has been under the rule of the same family for over 40 years.
Right.
And there's already, a certain level of discontent simmering beneath the surface. And the scandal, well, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
So this is more than just some juicy gossip. This has the potential to actually shake up the power dynamics of the entire country.
Oh, absolutely. The fact that this scandal reaches the inner circle of the ruling family and that the head of the agency that's supposed to be fighting corruption is right at the center of it, well, it makes people question the integrity of the entire system. It breeds this sense of disillusionment.
Okay, let's talk about Engonga for a minute. He goes from leading the charge against financial crimes to, well, being the poster child for a massive scandal. What happens to him now?
Well, he's already been detained on suspicion of embezzlement, which is a serious charge in itself. But now with these videos coming out, he could be facing additional charges related to privacy violations, potentially even endangering public health.
Endangering public health.
Yeah.
How did that even come into play here?
Well, the Attorney General has actually stated that if Engonga is found to have a sexually transmitted disease, he could be held responsible for potentially spreading it to his partners. And in Equatorial Guinea, that's considered a crime.
Wow, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to this situation.
It really does. And I think it highlights the broader societal impact of this scandal. Because it's not just about politics, it's about real people, families, relationships. The women in these videos are victims too, caught in the crossfire. Their reputations are tarnished, their families are impacted, and their sense of safety and privacy has been completely shattered.
It's a pretty sobering reminder that actions have consequences. And in the digital age, those consequences can be amplified tenfold.
Exactly. Something that might have remained a private matter a few decades ago can now be broadcast to the entire world in an instant. And once it's out there, it's virtually impossible to control the narrative.
And speaking of control, we talked earlier about how the government seems to be trying to limit the spread of these videos by disrupting internet access in the country. Do you really think that's going to be an effective strategy in the long run?
It's almost like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a broom. It might be able to suppress information temporarily, but ultimately it's just going to fuel speculation and resentment. It creates this perception that the government is more concerned with protecting its own image than actually addressing the real issues at hand.
So rather than calming things down, they might actually be making the situation even worse.
Exactly. It's a classic case of unintended consequences. And it also speaks to one of the bigger themes that this scandal highlights: the power of information in the digital age. It's harder than ever to control the narrative, especially when you have a story like this that's captured the attention of people around the world.
It really feels like we're at a turning point. This scandal has revealed some major cracks in the system, and now the big question is whether those cracks are going to widen or get patched up.
That's exactly right. The coming weeks and months are going to be critical. Will the government actually take concrete steps to address the concerns raised by this scandal? Or are they going to try and sweep it under the rug and hope everyone just forgets about it?
Well, either way, I have a feeling this story is far from over. This deep dive has been quite a ride, hasn't it? From the initial shock of the scandal itself to all the political maneuvering and the social fallout, it's been a lot to process. But I'm curious to hear your perspective on the bigger picture. What does all of this tell us about Equatorial Guinea? And what lessons can we, as a global community, learn from this whole ordeal?
That's a fantastic question, and it's something we should definitely explore further. This scandal, while very specific to Equatorial Guinea, raises some universal questions about power, accountability, privacy, and the responsible use of technology in our modern world.
We've really dug deep into this Equatorial Guinea scandal, and it's clear this is way more than just a salacious story. It feels like we're watching a system kind of teetering on the edge, like it's being tested.
I agree. It's really a fascinating case study in how something that seems like an isolated incident can suddenly illuminate these broader issues. This scandal has, I think, really exposed how fragile trust in institutions can be. And of course, the potential for abuse of power is always there. It also makes us think about how we navigate, morality and personal responsibility in this digital age we live in.
Okay, so let's take a step back for a minute and look at the bigger picture. What are the key takeaways here? What can we learn from this whole ordeal, not just about Equatorial Guinea, but maybe about ourselves and the world as a whole?
Well, I think the first thing is it reinforces this idea that corruption, unfortunately, is a global issue. It's not confined to one country or one region. It's something that can take root anywhere, even in places where, power is concentrated in the hands of just a few.
And it seems like this scandal has confirmed what many people have suspected about Equatorial Guinea for years. This idea that there's, a darker side beneath the surface of oil wealth and political stability.
Exactly. And it raises some important questions about accountability, especially within the country's political system. I mean, if the person in charge of fighting corruption is allegedly embezzling funds, what does that say about the system as a whole?
It's almost like putting, the fox in charge of the hen house. Except in this case, the fox is throwing parties and filming everything.
That's a great analogy. It really highlights the need for checks and balances, for transparency, because without those things in place, power can easily be abused and corruption can flourish.
And I think this scandal also really underscores the double-edged sword of technology in a way. On the one hand, it was the leak of these videos that exposed everything and forced the government to respond.
You're right. Technology has the power to hold people accountable, to increase transparency. Citizen journalists and whistleblowers can now use platforms like social media to expose wrongdoing that might have, been swept under the rug in the past.
But on the flip side, it also raises concerns about privacy, about the potential for harm that comes with living in this digital age.
It's a tricky issue. We're still, as a society, trying to wrap our heads around the ethical implications of technology, especially when it comes to privacy and the spread of sensitive information. This whole situation is a stark reminder that our digital footprints, for better or worse, can have very real consequences.
Yeah, consequences that we might not even anticipate. It's a lot to process, but it feels like this scandal has forced us to confront some important questions. Questions about power, accountability, and, what it means to use technology responsibly.
I completely agree. And I think it's a conversation that needs to happen on a global scale. We need to figure out how to ensure that people in positions of power are held accountable for their actions, how to protect individuals from harm in this digital age, and ultimately how to build a more just and equitable world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into this really wild scandal, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this whole conversation?
I think the most important takeaway is this. While this story unfolded in a very specific context, it raises some universal questions. Questions about power, about accountability, about privacy, and the responsible use of technology. These are questions that we should all be thinking about, regardless of where we live or what our role in society is.
It's a good reminder that we're all interconnected in a way, and that events happening in one corner of the world can have a ripple effect that reaches far and wide. It's up to each of us to stay informed, engage in these conversations, and work towards building a future where power is used responsibly, privacy is respected, and ultimately justice prevails.
Very well said.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.